Hey everybody, this is day 2 of the Geometry Nodes series, and today we're going to be creating this result right here. I'm going to show you every single step of the way and explaining every single node. You can use them in your own projects and come up with more creative setups. So I'm Sharaz from Globally, and let's get into it. So yeah, let's delete everything from our scene and get started. Now I'm going to set up my viewport first. So we get Geometry Nodes over here, and this is our preview. So the steps to create this is pretty simple. First of all, we need an object to apply the node system to. So we're going to get a cube, hit tab, and subdivide it. Then in the subdivide panel over here, bring up the smoothness to 1 and give it some more subdivisions. This many should be enough. Now let's create a new setup and name it to bubbles. So first of all, let me explain how we're going to do this whole thing and how we're going to manage the setup. We have an input over here and we're getting the output here. First of all, we need the outer layer of the bubble. So we create that layer and we have a join geometry over here. Then we do another step where we get our geometry from here and instance these small bubbles inside of the larger one. So these are kind of the little particles, little details that you want to add for realistic results. This is instancing. And then in the third step, we will also add a little bit of more detail in the middle of the bubble. Let's suppose this is the bubble. We have the smaller little points over here. And then we add something that comes out from the center like that, and it kind of creates a cool visual here. This is just a simplified view of that, and all of these are going to come together to the join geometry node, and then we'll have the output. So if you look at it from smaller steps and not the whole node system, you're less likely to freak out and get scared. So it's better if you always look at it like small setups. Now let's start working on it. First of all, I need the mesh to be rotating along the z-axis, just like that. This rotation is not going to be used in the first step, but when we instance stuff later, the rotation is going to work on those instances. Let's do it anyway first. So I'm going to get a transform node, transform geometry. And here, we're just going to animate our rotation. You can get a combine XYZ to get a better look at all of them and only animate the z-axis, which you can do from here as well. But over here, you can use other fields separately for only z-axis if you want to. Now, I want the animation to be 150 frames. Insert a keyframe on the z-axis. And let's do like 180 degrees. So I'm going to type pi here and insert that. If I play that, so we got a little animation going on for our outer layer of the geometry. And let's set the position of it. So I want the geometry to kind of wobble around and create this sort of displacement on the bubble so that it looks a little more alive and not so stiff. And I'm going to do that by using the set position node. And as I told you before, set position is not only used for creating terrains, it's used for other cool stuff as well. So let's get that set position and put it there. And I'm going to get a noise texture for this. And before, what we used here was a normal and a noise texture. So the normals were the coordinates in the part 1. And this time we're going to use the position of it. We're just getting the position of each point, which is that and that and that. And we're using the noise texture to move these points away from its position. So it's going to be a little bit different. It's like random according to the noise and not along some normals. Let's get a vector map. And this time, if you want the color to act in 3 dimensions, you're going to have to use 3 dimensions over here as well. So you're going to get familiar with these values as you start to use them. But for now, let's not over-explain this, and yeah, it'll get you confused. So let's connect that to the vector, and we cannot use add here because we don't want to add it. We just want to multiply it to the position. So choose that and connect that to the offset. And you can see it's kind of scaling up, which we don't want. And this is because of the RGB values from the color. So we need to make them ready for a multiplication here before we multiply it. So let's set that to subtract. And I'm gonna subtract 0.5 from each axis. And now if you mute the set position, it's normal. And bring down the detail to 0 because we want a very subtle effect here. It should be very large on the geometry, just like that. Bring down the scale slowly and hold down shift if you want the value to scale down slowly. And let's use something like that. You also want to animate this noise as well, so let's get 4D noise, and as before I told you, the W value can now be animated with a scene time. And if you play that, if I mute the rotation of it, I can see how it looks like. And then if you want to make it faster than this, so to control the speed, you're going to get a math node. And as this is a float value, we can multiply it by 2 and it'll be 2 times faster. So if I play that now, and if I turn on the rotation as well, this is how it looks like. But of course, we don't want the noise to be affecting the position too much, so we can always add another vector math and set it to scale. So we can scale the effect of it, and I'm going to scale it down to 0.4 or something. So this should make it look pretty nice. So we don't want a fully circular sphere over here. We want it to be a little bit random. And this is the setup so far, and you know what it's doing. So let's smoothen our geometry, and for that we're going to use the subdivision surface node and set it to 2 or something. That should work, and get a set shade smooth node. As I told you before, the initials of each word in a node's name are considered as shortcuts. So if I want to add something like a set shade smooth node, so it's S in all of the 3 words. So if I type S 3 times, we're going to get set shade smooth on top. So yeah, that's a pretty cool tip. If you want to speed up the process, I think I should make my viewport a little bit bigger so that you can see it better. This should work fine. And there we go. Let's add a material to this. So they're going to get the set material node. Set material. Put it over here and create a new material for this first. And name it to water. There we go. I'm going to bring down the roughness to almost 0. And the IOR to 1.43 or something. It's actually 1.33, but we're going to adjust that to our scene later. And bring up the brightness a little more. And that should work fine for now. Let's choose the material over here, which is this one. And we're going to get to work here to create all the other layers of this whole animation. So I'm going to hit Ctrl J on this. If you hit F2 here, you're going to name it to outer layer. So always keep things organized so you don't get confused in there. And you can see the zero rotation is not doing anything here. It's not much, it's not even visible. If you even mute it from here, it's not going to be visible anywhere. But now we can get this transform geometry node and use it for our instancing. So first of all, I'm going to instance on points over here. And if I instance something on here now, like an icosphere, and I Control-Shift-click on it to preview it. By the way, this will only work if you have Node Wrangler add-on enabled from here. You go to the add-ons and you search Node Wrangler here. And bring down the radius of this sphere. So right now we're only previewing this geometry right here that is going through that. And preview only works for stuff like if you want to work with inside of the node system and the viewport. So final render always works with this node. We're just previewing that and the animated mesh, and if I play that now, you can see it's actually rotating. I wanted the distribution to be random, not so uniform, because right now they are kind of following the pattern of a sphere. If you look at this, and then you turn this on, you can see it's following the same pattern. It is too uniform. So for that, you have a node. It is called distribute points on faces. So with this node, you can distribute points on any kind of faces, and it will distribute random points and give you these parameters to set them up. So I'm going to set it to Poisson disk and bring up the minimum distance. So the distance between each particle is going to be 0.39 meters. So it'll always keep that distance, and that way they won't intersect with each other. So now, without using the viewer node, let's get a join geometry node, and that way we can see everything together. Join geometry, and then I'm going to connect this to the join geometry and remove the viewer node. Now you can see what is happening here. But of course we want this one to be inside the outer layer, so we need to scale this down. For that, you can just get a transform node, transform geometry node, and if you scale this down, will this affect? Yes, this will affect the distribution of the geometry. So what you can do is basically remove this transform node from here with Control X and put it over here. Now when you scale it down, so basically it's after the distribution, that way it won't affect the faces, because first of all, the distribution happens on the area of a face. So if you have a face here, it's like that, and the area is 1 meter. Now if you scale down this face, just like that, the area will be less than 1 meter. So let's say it's 0.5 now, and this node looks at the area. So the less area we have, the less points we're going to get. And when we apply the transform node after the distribution, it doesn't care about the face or anything like that, because the distribution has already happened and nothing will happen to this. It won't flicker around. So yeah, that's it. Now we can scale them down to fit it inside the sphere. And you can also just preview that and bring down the radius of it. Give it about 3 subdivisions, and make sure you use the set shade smooth node after the join geometry so that it's applied on every single setup that we use in here. So just like this, everything comes together. They get smoothened by this node, and then the water material is added to that. Of course, we're going to edit them based on how they look like later in the cycles render preview. But for now, let's just get the base of everything ready. And I don't want all of them to have one simple scale, so we're going to get a random value. And after using that, you can get that connected to the scale. Each one has a different scale, and they're random. So I'm going to set the minimum to 0.2 so they're not too small, and that should work fine. So this is what it looks like so far, and let me set up the lighting and render as well so that we can start doing some progress. I chose the gradient texture as the environment here, and I'm going to set it to quadratic sphere or spherical. Let's choose something that works. That should be fine. Looks kind of bad to me right now. I don't know what's the reason. Oh yeah. So while we created the material, we did a mistake here, and we actually chose the principled BSDF over here. So it should actually be glass. And if you don't want to change it, that's okay too. Just go to the transmission and bring up the weight to 1. And that's basically glass as well. So you can see from now, like without doing anything here, anything fancy, we already got a very beautiful looking setup. So you can also slow down the animation by just tweaking with these 2 values. If you think this is too fast, you're going to have to select the object and the node as well to get the keyframes. So I'm going to stretch these out a little bit so they're slower. That should work fine. Now you also want some final touches to this, and here we're going to use another setup. First of all, let's Ctrl J to frame that up as well, and we can rename it to layer 2. For the next one, we're going to get the same geometry from the transform node, and let's just select these nodes and hit Ctrl Shift D, and now hit Alt T, so they'll come out of the frame. If you duplicate this group input node, it doesn't really matter, you can duplicate it and it'll work the same, but you cannot duplicate the group output right here. So we have the same group input, which is the mesh that we got inside of the edit mode right there, and that's the original geometry. And the same thing is happening over here. Okay, let's get the same combine XYZ, which is already animated on the Z-axis. You can see that it's kind of green, and after duplicating it, I kind of lost the animation from here. So I'm going to use my previous one and remove this one. And you can get a reroute over here. You'll have the same animation, but we can also, let's Shift A, math. You can get a math node or a vector math if you want to be precise. You can basically add something to it or multiply it by something. So I'm going to use multiply here and just speed it up a little bit. So the normal multiplication is going to be 1. If you multiply anything by 1, it should stay the same. So if you multiply 10 by 1, it's going to be 10 again. The normal result is going to be 1, and then we push it up a little bit, make it 1.2 or something, and then you can also add something to it and make it more random. Remember, we're only doing the z-axis, so this is x, y, and z. We don't have anything to do with the other axes. And if you don't want to use two nodes here, you can just remove this one and set it to multiply add. And then is the multiplier, and this is the addend. So you're going to add something. You can add anything you want here. It won't affect it that much because this is just going to be your offset, not the speed of the animation. This will decide the speed. So this will give us randomness, and now we can use this over here to get our instances. So I'm going to instance on points, and now I'm going to create a new mesh for this one and then import it to geometry nodes and use that as the instance. We are not just limited to the mesh primitives from here. We can use our own geometry. Make sure to save your file and go to the 3D report over here. So I'm going to create a cube, and then we isolate that from our scene. Let's just create something that looks good. And extrude that, scale it down, extrude it down again, and then just scale it down way over here. And remember, we want the origin to be on here. So let's select everything and bring it up so the origin is right at the bottom. Let's hit Ctrl 3 to give it some subdivisions and set it shade smooth. Now you can edit this mesh later after instancing, but for now, let's just try it. Let's go to geometry nodes, select the object, and you can get an object info node over here. Object info, and basically just choose your object from the outliner or this 3D scene, but you can also just import it, drag and drop to the geometry nodes, and that will do the work. It doesn't have to be relative. You can we always kind of use the relative for geometry proximity and stuff like that, but for importing objects, you're going to use the original position and connect that directly to the instance. And now we can move it over here to our final join geometry and get this like that. You can see how the instancing looks for now. At this point, we're getting into some troubles, and let's solve them one by one. So, first of all, our scale is off, it's not correct. And we can just simply do that from here. Bring down the scale, to whatever you like, and then our rotation is not correct. So let me show you what I mean by this and how we're going to fix it. Let's suppose if you have a circle here and you want to instance stuff on these points of a circle. And once you instance stuff on there, the Blender doesn't know where you want the instances to be facing and rotated towards. So let's see if I have this arrow and I want instances on here. It's going to look like that. All the arrows are going to be facing upwards because it doesn't know which rotation they should be going. But for circles, we have like a tangent, which is similar to the normals from here. So let's take it as normals. These are the normals of a circle. And once you give it that data, the circle is going to have these arrows pointed towards the normals. And it's going to be the same for the sphere as well. So keep that in mind. You can use normals in many places, not just for instancing. It is used a lot. So yeah, let me show you how to actually use normals here. Let me get a normal node. But keep that in mind, once you add a distribute points on faces node, and you use that as a distributor, then you have already a normal socket over here. And once you have this socket and your geometry is connected over here, this normal node won't work. And you're going to be thinking, why isn't it working? Should have done that before. And get the normal connected to the vector. That should be okay. And yeah, it goes to the vector and we want the z-axis connected to the rotation. So now you can actually duplicate that and just scale it down to whatever you want. And I'm going to scale it down to basically 0. So we don't want any space in between there. And you can see we still have some space. And this is because of the object we have. So go to the 3D viewport. You have to bring it down to the origin like that. So they're almost connected. Let's go to geometry nodes once again. Select the object and get the preview. Now let's get a poison disk and bring up the minimum distance. And you have a random seed value as well. But I'm going to bring up the minimum distance a little bit more. So we don't want it to be too populated here. And let's preview the whole thing together. So rendered view. This is what it looks like for now. And we can make it a lot more interesting than this. Let's keep working and let's see what we can get. So in the 3D viewport, you can actually edit this mesh to be more interesting. Right now it is not that cool. So let's scale this middle point down. And I'm going to scale the head of it down as well. Scale that down just like that. And bring it down a little bit. Honestly, this looks pretty nice. Go to geometry nodes back here. And I'm going to try adding some more instances to this. And let's bring it up a little bit more. Let's bring down the distance a little bit. You can see the result is looking pretty great. And you can play with the IOR to get a different kind of look from the glass. Now you also want these instances to be scaling up and down to its middle point. And how are we going to do that? Well, it is very easy. You can get a scale instances node. They're pretty self-explanatory. So scale instances just scales your instancing, and let's get a noise texture like before. And you can see I've used this scene time and a multiply, and then it is connected to the W over here. So of course for this one I'm not going to use the color of this, because scale is not like in 3 dimensions. It's just one scale for all of the axes of each instance. And I'm going to use the factor here. And as I use the factor, it's going to treat all of my instancing at once, because it's treating them like one object. If you scroll through this or something, it won't work. I'm going to make it 40 first. You can see it is treating them all at once. And how are we going to fix that? You can use the index of each point, and then we're going to write it to the instance. So just use the index node here, and that should work fine. Now let's get a math node. You can multiply this math node to make the values a little bit stronger than this, and also use a color ramp so you can customize these values as well. Just like that, bring up the black values so the smaller ones are not too small, and try these steps, make it easy. And remember, with glass you always need some good lighting, and without these lights it looks kind of boring. So we haven't even done any lighting here yet, but it still looks pretty nice to me. And with glass you have to find a very good angle as well. Now this is not animated yet, so we're just gonna get a scene time node and connect the seconds to the W. And if you play this now, it is too fast. So let's get a math node and multiply it with a smaller number like 0.1, and this should work fine. You can see how this acts now. And this is looking a little bit dull and boring because the scene settings are not set up to be a little bit high contrast. So let's do that first, and let's also do some compositing. So we're going to use real-time compositing here. Let's set it to always, and there we have the nodes. I'm going to just set the color up a little bit. You're going to see how much more interesting it gets. So let's bring this down a little bit, make this a little bit yellow, no, a little bit green, blue, and this one should be like that as well. Bring this one up, this one down a little bit. Now this looks pretty good to me. You can always go into each element of the setup and try and adjust them, but let's scale down these instances over here, because I think they're kind of distractive. I'm going to hide this object. I think it's interfering with the lighting. Let me just add a little bit more detail to the object over here so that it gets more interesting, you know. The first time I did it, it was pretty cool because I wasn't teaching anyone. Right now, let's just apply the subdivision and icosphere or UV sphere maybe. Let's scale it down. Put it in the middle of that. Distribute a few of them, and this will give us some details. And once you've played this, it's pretty nice. Maybe we can bring down the detail of the noise to 0, and that way it'll be way smoother. Yes. So you can use these kind of visuals with maybe a skincare serum or something and all that. I just wanted to show you that there's lots of possibilities. When you get a project, you can use these creative setups and create pretty nice visuals for them. And usually this will be very hard to do, like one by one or with modifiers and stuff, or animating each thingy one by one. And it's not interesting at all. It's just too boring and time consuming. This is the cool way to do it, so I want you to be cool. And also, let me summarize all these nodes for you. Let's set this one up as well as a group right here. So what we did here, created the outer layer, animated it, kind of wobbling around. Animation is done with this set position, and this is the Z rotation. Then we created the layer 2, those bubbles, and then we have the final middle part of the whole thing, which is kind of the hero of it, and the whole reflections, they all come together to create this final piece. And we joined them together, set shade smooth, and gave it one material. I wonder what it would be like to give it a random materials to each one. So like you can duplicate this node to 3 of them and choose a different material and remove this one. This is possible as well. So save your files, and you can add elements to this setup over here. If you want to support this series, you can go over to my Patreon page and join any membership that suits you. And yeah, let's end it for today, and I'll see you on day 3.